Good. Okay, so we're just waiting for your mom?
She's coming on now.
Okay, great.
And here I am.
Hi there, Karen.
Hey.
Where are?
How
Oh, you're
are you?
at your house upstate.
I am.
What town are you in, Karen?
In Narrowsburg.
Narrowsburg, yeah. Very familiar with. I'm familiar with Narrowsburg.
Where are you?
I'm over in Red Hook,
Oh, okay.
New York, yeah. But Narrowsburg, there's a friend of mine made a documentary about that town because it had this scam film festival a bunch of years back. I don't know if you know the story.
No.
Oh yeah, you look for the documentary Narrowsburg. It's
Okay.
out there and watch it.
Okay,
They-
I will.
Yeah,
They just got their house. They just bought it.
I understand.
We're new to the area, so.
Got it. Yeah, it's got an interesting little recent history there with that, but it's I think they actually have another now. It's not called the Narrowsburg. I don't think that is in the name of the festival or anything, but I think that Lone Movie Theater there, they do have like some sort of film festival every year, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Everybody has a film festival, so there are many, many of them. Speaking of which, segue here. Now tell me a little bit, because I don't remember the Tribeca Film Festival, and yes, we've started.
Right.
Tell me a little bit. Is this like the first year where Tribeca is incorporating podcasting into the festival?
This is their second year. They
Okay.
did it last year. I think it was, I don't know how many they had last year, but I think they realized they had to get into the space, and I'm assuming other festivals will follow them because I think they should. But last year was the first year, and then this year it was a little more free form last year.
Mhm.
And this year they're trying to put a little more structure around it. So they have 5 fiction and 5 nonfiction. They're all series. So I think last year they had you could have like a one-off episode or just like a podcast that was just one episode. So this year I think they want everything that's part of a longer series. But
Right.
it's great. It's
right.
great.
Yeah,
And they
I
have
mean,
a lot of,
Go ahead.
sorry. They have a lot of, they're also doing like a lot of panels and stuff like that. And a lot of, not like Tribeca Talk events as well.
yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. So many podcast series along the lines of I Was Never There are being made into films or, et cetera, right? Or films are basing on original concepts that were perhaps podcasts or articles or feature articles, things of that nature. So this, I mean, there's a long history of that, but podcasts are, I guess, still relatively new medium, even though they've been around for, I don't even know, 15, 20, I don't know. But I wouldn't know anything about podcasting. But anyway, it's congratulations on this. This is a great opportunity. A lot more people, of course, will know. And also before we get into the actual nuances of the podcast, it's also available through the Wonder Media Network, right? So it's also, are there a few episodes currently out in the public yet, or no?
No, we can't release it until until we have our Tribeca premiere, which is on June 9th. So on June 9th, it will premiere at Tribeca virtually. Podcasts premiere virtually. They have 10 podcasts that are in competition, and they're releasing 2 every other day. But anyone can listen to them. They don't charge for them. It's not like a film screening where you have to pay $25. So in some ways, I think it can reach a broader audience. But then, so June 9th is when the first episode will release. We have 8 episodes. And
so you go to their
the podcast will be released. You go through Tribeca but it will also be on like anywhere you can listen to your podcasts.
Oh,
And
okay.
I don't know the specifics of it yet. We have a marketing meeting on Monday to discuss the full launch, but we cannot release until we release at through Tribeca, which is June 9th.
Okay, so it'll be available, but through Tribeca's podcasting platform, because you're saying it's going to also be out there. Karen, can you please explain all this to me? How are you dealing with all the technology?
How am
What?
I doing with it?
Yeah, you seems like you're fine, but I just wonder because I don't know that you represent the typical person in your demographic to be careful about how I say things. But you know, a lot
I'm
of
not the
people.
least bit careful, Adam, about how I say
I guess I
things.
should know that by now. But go ahead. I mean, are you like following all this stuff?
Uh, I would say that prior to this, I was not a big podcast listener. I am listening a lot more now. The problem is when I listen, I fall asleep often. So
Yes.
it's got to be the sort of thing you're doing when you have other things going on.
Right.
So,
Yes. In other words, to stimulate you. That's very true. I'll often tell my girlfriend because she has periodic trouble sleeping. I'll just recommend a particular episode of my podcast. That's not great marketing, by the way, to say that publicly and also to you guys who are on my podcast. But I would not
No.
use this episode as an example. So
I would say my mom came into this as a sort of along for the ride. I'm just going to go along for the ride. My daughter wants to do this. I'm going to do it with my daughter.
Support
It's going
her.
to be so fun. But I
Right.
mean, Mom, what has this process been for me? But by the end, it was completely different, I would say.
I would say I am now a podcast producer.
All right. Well, maybe we could talk off mic later, because I can certainly use some help. But all right. Well,
she's
since
a good podcast producer. By the end, she was a complete part. Not by the end, but by the time we really got started, it was a full partnership. And maybe I dealt with a little more of the tech stuff, but in terms of the creative part of the podcast, it was a full partnership.
Right. Well, since you're talking about your dynamic behind the scenes, why don't we also talk about it, like as far as the actual subject matter, just to fill in the gaps here for people listening or watching. Karen, you raised your daughters in a communal back to the land environment, right? In West Virginia.
Yes,
What years are we talking about?
we're talking, well, Jamie was born in 73, which is when we
There you go. You've been outed. Go ahead.
That's all right.
which is when we moved to Braxton County, West Virginia, to a farm. And we left West Virginia. I left West Virginia in 1983. So it was a 10-year span.
Right.
Spent between the farm, and then the last few years was spent in Morgantown, West Virginia, which is about 75 miles north of where we were living.
Interesting. So I should mention, by the way, as a disclaimer, right? Jamie and I have a history of our own at a summer camp in Vermont. And what years were you there, Jamie? Because I remember you as a very quiet, let's see, just somebody who like definitely was careful about who she talked to. It seemed, or maybe just like I don't know. I didn't think this through before I started going on about it, but I just remember you being not sure how to I didn't know how to quite I didn't know how to interpret, I guess, as a young kid. Like I knew your cousin better, of course, and you were quiet, and I just thought, oh, she doesn't like me very much. That was my understanding.
I was there from age 9, I think, to 12. 5 years. I went for 5 years.
Right.
To Thoreau. But I mean, now we're putting our entire life story out into the
Right.
world. So who
You were-
knows?
You were only 12. I thought you went older than 12.
Because I did Children's Express, so I
Oh, you did.
ended up stopping Thoreau. I didn't go the last year. Actually, I was never a senior at Thoreau. Not that anyone listening to this cares, but I did 5 years. I could have done a 6th, but I didn't. I think because of Children's Express.
Mm.
But I was quiet, but I'm not quiet anymore.
So you were just generally quiet. Okay.
Perhaps.
How was your memorying? And then I'll get back to the context of this actual show. I won't spend too much time, but how was that a product of how you grew up in this back to the land and culture?
Well, I always wanted to tell the story of the Back to the Land movement of the 1970s in West Virginia, because for me, it was just such an important part of my childhood. And also, I think my relationship with my parents, and also all of these other people that we grew up with, that we lived with at times, or lived very close with, or kind of had communal relationships with. And so for a while, I've been trying to figure out how to tell that story, because I think it's really relevant also to today. I think they're dealing with a lot of the same issues. They were dealing with a lot of the same issues that we're dealing with today. Environmental issues, a corrupt president, impeachment, all of that. And I just also, it was a fun time. And I wanted to be able to tell that fun part of it, and try to find a way to do it without cliches, because I think a lot of times people, when they talk about the 70s, they in entertain, sort of in film and television, it's sort of the cliche version of that.
Yeah.
But I loved growing up that way, and I always wanted to tell that story. And then we kind of was listening to another podcast that made me realize that maybe we could combine this story of Marsha, which is my parents' friend who disappeared in 1988, who had a very similar background of being a back to the lander and a political progressive and kind of wild, like
Right.
my parents, and that maybe we could combine the two stories and tell them together, which is what we did. But I love that, growing up like that. I mean, it was not without conflict and issues, as we learned throughout making the podcast, but I think it's a good story to tell, and I think there's a lot of lessons to learn from it also, about hope and resilience and risk taking.
And one of the ways this podcast works is as a because it works on a number of levels, but one way is as a kind of a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Because because Marsha, who you just mentioned, disappeared off the face of the planet, essentially, right? And
Never,
so this
never
is
to be seen again. Never
right.
to be seen again.
So the mystery is still cold. So this also works as a sort of a suspense story or a mystery story. And Karen, what has it been like for you? The contrast, I guess, between having lived through that in the 70s and the 80s, and then since, I guess, you've sort of returned to, you've gone away. What's the alternative to back to the land? Off the land. I don't know, but
Yeah, no, when we left, we left the farm in 1980 when I got busted, because I had to change my life and demonstrate to the judge that I had been rehabilitated, Your Honor. I was only trying to stay off welfare. So went to graduate school, but I think the hardest transition, or the biggest transition, was really that when we moved off back to the land and off the grid, and even in part in those years in Morgantown, we really thought we could live an alternative life, that we did not have to play by the rules of capitalism, and we couldn't.
Mm.
And I had kids, and who, damn it, wanted to eat meals every day. And,
just like, what a nuisance,
Really, yeah.
Um, was
So,
yeah,
but it was, I mean, specifically leaving and changing my life was really one of the things that prompted it. Was Jamie saying to me, can't you be like other moms? Like get up in the morning and go to work and come home and make dinner and, we can have a cat and
right.
just be regular, right? And
Yeah. I was on the
That never happened, by the way.
well, we
The
got
this
regular.
conversation never happened, or the return to that type of lifestyle never happened.
No, we were never going to be a regular. I mean, I don't think we were ever going to be a regular family, which is fine. And even when we moved to New York, we were not a regular. We never became a regular family.
I wonder though, right? But I wonder, Karen mentions that after getting herself back, sort of straightened out, according to society's expectations anyway, that, went to grad school.
Never straight, Adam, never.
No, I understand that. I'm kind of getting back to it because did you feel it had to, I was wondering how difficult it was to leave what seemed like an ideal fit to this, having to go back into a more conventional lifestyle that you didn't really do as a choice, but more as, you were propelled into it necessarily, right?
Well, the choice to move back to New York City was a choice. I mean, that was a choice, and that choice was in part driven by the fact that I became increasingly aware that I didn't want my kids growing up in an environment where it looked like the whole world was white and Christian.
Mm.
Right? That I did make a choice to move into an environment that was more intentionally diverse and multicultural. And so that was a choice. And I tried to kind of cut the decision or by working in nonprofits, right? At that point, it felt like it was a way to make a living. It didn't feel like I was totally selling out to the corporate world and to capitalism. In fact, that's not the case. We all know about the nonprofit industry, right? But so I
Lesser
was
of evils.
trying to walk a line.
Mm-hmm. Right. I see. Very good. How has the reaction been to your telling the story, and how has reconnecting with your old friends from those days? Were those relationships intact over the years, or did you seek them out, and what are you still in touch with all these friends that from then? How would you describe that?
It's been a combination.
Okay.
Yeah, we knew some people, some people we didn't. Some people through word of mouth had stories that they wanted to tell us, and then we connected with them. I mean, anyone that we met felt like part of a larger tribe, the sort of tribe of Marsha. Everyone felt like family in a way. There was definitely stuff we learned along the way that we did not know. There's a lot of stuff in the podcast that is surprising, especially in some of the later episodes, episode 5, 6, and 7, really 5 and 7.
I've only heard 1 through 3, just so people understand. I don't even know how things go. Yeah.
But it was great. And even tomorrow, we have a call with someone that wants to tell us about a conversation they had with Marsha 2 weeks before she disappeared. Somebody we are friends with, but we never reached out to. We felt like somebody that if they wanted to talk, they would come to us. And now people are seeing that the podcast is coming out, and it's piquing interest. But Marsha did have a folk hero, was a folk hero in the Morgantown, West Virginia scene because of these bars that she owned and also all the work that she did with young people. Mm-hmm. So I think people are really happy that the story is being told. I think they'll be surprised about some of the stuff that they're going to hear. And people, because we have a close relationship with Marsha, they were willing to talk to us. There actually have been other people who have wanted to do a podcast about Marsha, but because we have this personal connection to her, I think people felt like we would handle it with care. And also we had this other story to tell that was our own story. So people have been really forthcoming and brave. I mean, people are telling us stories that they've been holding on to for 35, 34 years, 40 years. So it's been great. I mean, the true crime part is hard. That's the hardest part of the story, is the true crime part. But it's been really fun, wouldn't you say, Mom?
Mm-hmm. It's been a gas. We have always stayed connected to our Back to the Land community.
Okay.
Gone down there regularly. They are still amongst the people that I love the most in this world. But
there's sort of a diaspora, right, of those people, I suppose, now, right?
And there's still a bunch of them in the hills. I mean, there's lots of them that are still there.
Wow.
I wouldn't call them back to the landers anymore. You know, ultimately, we all had to figure out how to make a living, which was something we hadn't considered when we first moved off the grid. But so people became teachers, or, you know, went back to school, but lots of them are still there in the woods.
And what is the, I guess I was going to ask you what the status of the cases, but that might also impinge on the final episodes and how that turns out. So it's difficult to talk about that in specific terms, I guess.
Yeah, I would say we had never done anything related to true crime. I'd say we're like accidental detectives, perhaps. And funny enough, now people are calling us with other stories that they want us to look into. But yeah, we want people to
almost
listen
like
to the
that
podcast.
Steve Martin Shorts. Yeah, right.
It's sort of like that.
Yeah.
And I think that people will have to listen to the podcast to sort of hear how it progresses. But the true crime part is challenging. You know, you want to be accurate. You want to get it right. You don't want to give out misinformation. We developed a very close relationship with the Morgantown Police Department. One detective there in particular, whose dad was a detective when he was a kid. And so he had always known about the case, and he's kind of they haven't done anything with it, but it's there, they're aware of it. And he's been really forthcoming with interviews and conversations. But true crimes can be a little scary sometimes.
Yeah, I imagine so. You don't know where things can all of a sudden turn, and you know, in a very drastic, or pivot in a very drastic way. But so far, hopefully, everybody's safe
and we were given tips. You know, people would say, "Oh, this is who I think it was. Yeah. This is who I think it was," and we had to be really careful. You know, you have to be really careful in true crime not to falsely accuse anyone either, because everybody has their different ideas of what happened. But we would always go back to the detective and give any information that we had, so that we weren't the only people that had some particular information.
Right. It's the name of the podcast called I Was Never There. It's going to be part of the Tribeca audio storytelling I don't know what to call it, component or silo at the festival.
Section
is a good word. And it's when is it going to play or premiere through Tribeca?
On June 9th. Ours will premiere.
June 9th. Thank you. I'm really glad we reconnected. Obviously, we were connected last year or the year before when I first got up here. I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful to meet you, Karen. It's very nice to meet you. I may have met you once before. I don't know. We maybe 30, 40 years ago, somewhere in Vermont. You
would have met me at camp for Parents' Day or pickup.
Exactly, dropping off or picking up Jamie and Sarah. And it's really nice to meet you now. Anyway, and I of course, wish you much luck with the podcast. I would vote. I'll vote. I don't know if I can vote, but
I don't think I think it's a jury, not an audience.
Oh, vote. It's a jury. That makes sense.
I believe so for this. And we appreciate being on here, because podcasting, like any form of content, requires word of mouth. And and so we're grateful. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Adam.
All right. Talk to
Bye.
you again soon. Okay. Bye.
you.